California rent shock, why 2026 will break the housing market. The rent crisis in California is no longer a headline that flashes briefly across a screen before disappearing into the noise. Instead, it has become a slow-moving wave of pressure building beneath millions of households. A force that is tightening month by month and reshaping what it means to live, work, and survive in America's most iconic state. For years, California renters have felt the squeeze, rising costs, shrinking availability, and a market that constantly seems to outrun the paychecks of the very people who keep it alive. But in 2026, that squeeze is predicted to turn into something far more severe, something that pushes families out of neighborhoods, out of cities, and in many cases out of the state entirely. Behind the scenes, a combination of legislative changes, insurance disruptions, landlord departures, and market pressures have quietly merged into a single powerful storm. A storm that is pushing rent to levels that many households will soon find virtually impossible to manage. Tonight, we take a slow, deep, unflinching walk through this reality, calmly, clearly, without panic, and without sugarcoating what lies ahead. California's rent shock is not just about numbers on a spreadsheet or trends on a graph. It is about people, millions of them, trying to hold on to a lifestyle, a community, and a state they love, even as the financial ground beneath them begins to shift. It is about the laws passed in Sacramento that quietly reshape the rental market in ways few renters fully understand and in ways many landlords never anticipated. It is about insurance companies leaving, premiums exploding, and the cost of operating a rental property increasing so dramatically that thousands of housing units are suddenly at risk of being removed from the market. And it is about the future, what 2026 will truly look like when these forces collide in full force, and what it means for California renters who are already stretched to their limits. Tonight, we unravel every part of that story, slowly, carefully, and with the depth it deserves. We examine the cities where rent is projected to spike the fastest. We look at the new renter protection laws that sound helpful on paper but may push landlords to raise rents or leave the market entirely. And we explore why analysts warn that 2026 may go down as the 2 years that permanently reshape California's housing landscape. Let's begin. The 5 forces driving the 2026 rent. The first major force behind the coming rent shock is the massive shortage of rental units, a shortage that did not suddenly appear. Instead, it grew slowly over decades as construction lagged behind population growth. Environmental approvals stalled development, and local zoning created a maze that few developers were willing to navigate. California has built less housing per capita than almost any other state in the nation, and while demand continued to grow, supply fell further and further behind until the gap became impossible to ignore. By 2024, the shortage reached levels economists consider critical, with many cities operating with vacancy rates so low that even a small reduction in available housing can create immediate and dramatic rent spikes. This shortage is the foundation upon which every other force builds, and without addressing it, nothing else can truly change. The second force is the insurance crisis, which quietly exploded across California starting in 2022 and escalated sharply through 2024 and 2025. Insurance companies began dropping homeowners, including landlords, at a scale never before seen in the state's history, citing wildfire risk, climate patterns, and unmanageable reinsurance costs. Premiums surged by 40%, 60%, even 100% in some counties, and for landlords, this cost increase immediately translated into higher operating costs that must be recovered through rent. In the worst-hit regions, the Bay Area Hills, San Diego Canyons, Los Angeles brush zones, and much of Northern California, landlords are now facing insurance bills so steep that many are considering selling, converting units, or withdrawing from the rental market entirely. The third force is the landlords leaving the state, a trend that appeared small at first but has grown rapidly as property taxes, insurance premiums, and new regulations make renting less profitable and far more unpredictable. Small mom-and-pop landlords, who own 50% of all rentals in California, are the most vulnerable, and many of them now face the reality that renting out their homes simply no longer pays the bills. When these landlords sell, their homes are rarely purchased by other rental owners. Instead, they are bought by families who will live in the property, removing that unit from the rental market permanently. Every time a rental property disappears, rent pressure increases for everyone else, and when thousands disappear in a single year, the impact becomes unavoidable. The fourth force is construction slowdown, a trend driven by high interest rates, soaring material costs, and the growing difficulty developers face in financing large-scale housing projects. Many projects planned for 2024-2025 have already been delayed or canceled, and industry analysts warn that 2026 may see one of the smallest waves of new rental units delivered in decades. When construction slows at the exact same time demand rises, rent does not simply increase, it jumps sharply, quickly, and sometimes uncontrollably. This slowdown, combined with already record-low supply, creates the perfect conditions for explosive rent hikes. The fifth and final force, and perhaps the most misunderstood, is the wave of new renter protection laws passed in 2024 and 2025, many of which take full effect in 2026. These laws were designed to help renters by tightening eviction restrictions, limiting reasons for non-renewal, requiring relocation assistance, and increasing oversight of landlord practices. Yet, at the same time, they raise the cost of managing rental properties and increase the risks landlords face. Many landlords argue that these laws, including AB 2801, AB 2747, SB 567, AB 846, AB 628, SB 1051, create uncertainty and financial exposure that pushes them towards selling. Every time a landlord leaves, the rental market shrinks, and rent grows. These five forces, low supply, insurance collapse, landlord departures, construction slowdown, and new laws, together create the backbone of the rent shock that analysts say will define California in 2026. 2025-2026, new rental laws and their impact. The state legislature passed an unprecedented number of renter-focused laws in the past 2 years, and while each of them is intended to protect tenants, their combined effect on the rental market is far more complex. AB 2747, Temporary Eviction Restrictions. This law allows cities to temporarily pause certain types of evictions, especially during emergencies or significant economic disruptions. While it offers renters protection, it also introduces uncertainty for landlords who may no longer have predictable ways to manage problematic tenancies. Uncertainty leads to risk, and risk leads to higher rent, a simple economic truth. Many smaller landlords say this law has pushed them closer to selling, especially when paired with rising costs. AB 2801, Mandatory Proof of Habitability. This law requires landlords to prove that their property is habitable before attempting to evict a tenant. Though this seems reasonable on paper, the requirement for documentation, inspections, and compliance adds significant cost and delay to the eviction process. Landlords now face higher legal fees, more inspections, and administrative burdens that add to their operating expenses. These costs inevitably show up in rent, especially for small landlords with limited margins. AB 846, Renewal Transparency. This law requires landlords to provide detailed explanations, documentation, and advanced timelines when choosing not to renew a lease. While it increases fairness and communication, landlords argue that it limits their flexibility and exposes them to greater liability. In high-risk areas, landlords who cannot secure affordable insurance may need to exit the market, yet new renewal rules make that exit more complicated and costly. As landlords leave, the pool of rental units shrinks and rent rises. SB 1051, Expanded Penalties for Retaliation. This law strengthens penalties against landlords who attempt to raise rent, refuse maintenance, or issue notices in ways that could be interpreted as retaliation. While it protects tenants, it also raises the stakes for landlords managing their properties, forcing them to navigate a far more complex legal landscape. Higher legal risk leads to higher cost structures, and in a state already struggling with affordability, these increased costs push rent even higher. AB 628, Relocation Payments Expansion. This law increases the amount landlords must pay tenants when making certain types of no-fault evictions or when removing a property from the rental market. Though intended to support displaced tenants, it adds significant financial burden to landlords attempting to navigate insurance non-renewals, rebuild requirements, or financial hardship. Many small landlords say these payouts push them into selling their properties altogether. When properties leave the rental pool, rent climbs for everyone else, often dramatically. AB 414, AB 391, AB 806, AB 863, additional regulatory layers. These laws add layers of notice requirements, documentation, timing restrictions, and penalties. Individually, they seem minor, but collectively they create a new regulatory environment that is incredibly difficult for small landlords to navigate. Large corporations can manage these requirements easily, but the small landlords, the backbone of California's rental market, struggle under the weight, leading many to exit the market entirely. This wave of legislation is not inherently harmful, but its combined effect is profound. Landlords face higher costs, higher risks, and less flexibility. And as they leave, rentals become scarce, and rent becomes more expensive. San Diego. San Diego has already seen some of the sharpest rent increases in California, and the forces behind these increases are accelerating. Insurance premiums soared across coastal and inland areas, especially near canyons, hillside neighborhoods, and brush zones where wildfire modeling now marks entire zip codes as moderate to high risk. Property owners report insurance bills rising from $1,800 to $5,400, from $2,500 to $7,100, and in some cases doubling overnight after mandatory reevaluations. These costs do not stay in the background. They are passed through the rental market, creating a cascade of rent increases that push many families to the brink. At the same time, San Diego's housing supply remains critically low, with construction delays and zoning limitations preventing new projects from keeping up with population growth. Renters now compete for limited units, and landlords face unprecedented demand for even basic apartments, which pushes prices upward even further. By 2026, San Diego may become one of the least affordable rental markets in the entire nation, surpassing cities like Miami, Boston, and Washington, D.C. This shift represents not just a temporary spike, but a long-term structural change that will permanently reshape who can afford to live in the region. Los Angeles. Los Angeles presents a unique, complex picture, one where extreme wealth and profound economic struggle exist side by side. High-risk wildfire zones in the valleys, hillsides, and canyon neighborhoods have become almost impossible to insure affordably, triggering insurance cancellations and forcing many landlords onto the FAIR plan. Premiums of $10,000, $12,000, or even $18,000 per year are no longer unusual, especially for multi-unit properties. With insurance costs this high, landlords have only one path to survival: raising rent. Meanwhile, new eviction and renewal laws add additional financial and legal pressure, making it harder for landlords to manage long-term tenancies, invest in repairs, or maintain older properties. These pressures lead many landlords to sell, converting rental homes into owner-occupied units and shrinking the rental supply. A shrinking rental supply in a city of nearly 4 million people creates predictable outcomes: rapid rent inflation and intense competition. Analysts warn that Los Angeles may see rent increases of 15–25% over the next 2 years alone, even without further market shocks. San Francisco Bay Area. The Bay Area, home to some of the most expensive housing in the country, is entering an entirely new phase of the affordability crisis. Insurance issues have hit hillside communities hardest, but urban areas are not exempt, especially as construction costs and regulatory burdens stall new rental development. Renters in cities like Oakland, San Francisco, Cupertino, Los Gatos, and Redwood City increasingly compete for a shrinking pool of available units as landlords withdraw from the market. At the same time, property taxes and operational fees continue rising, forcing rent upward even in cities where demand has softened. Remote work changed the Bay Area, but it did not remove the affordability crisis. It simply shifted it. Many renters who left San Francisco during the pandemic are returning as office mandates increase, creating new demand for limited housing stock. Meanwhile, construction of new rentals is at one of the lowest levels in 2 decades due to financing constraints, development costs, and increasing regulatory pressure. By 2026, the Bay Area may reach rent levels that surpass even the pre-pandemic peak, pushing many working families into permanent relocation. Sacramento. Sacramento, once considered an affordable alternative to the Bay Area, has absorbed a massive influx of new residents in recent years. Population growth placed intense pressure on the rental market, causing sharp rent spikes throughout 2023 and 2024. Insurance costs increased across wildfire-adjacent neighborhoods and suburban zones, adding financial strain on landlords and limiting new development. Families that once escaped Bay Area prices by moving to Sacramento now face rents that feel increasingly out of reach. Fresno, Central Valley. The Central Valley was once the final refuge for Californians seeking affordability. But rising insurance rates, limited new construction, and population shifts have reduced that advantage. Rent in Fresno, Bakersfield, Modesto, and Stockton has risen steadily as more families relocate from coastal cities seeking lower prices. But demand has outpaced supply, leading to competitive rental bidding and higher baseline rents. By 2026, many analysts predict Fresno could experience rent increases similar to major metropolitan cities, a shift few anticipated a decade ago. As rent surges across California, analysts warn of a statewide transformation. Middle-class families may be permanently priced out of major cities, creating a migration pattern that favors only the wealthiest households or those with significant remote work flexibility. Businesses may face workforce shortages as employees relocate to more affordable regions, impacting industries like healthcare, education, transportation, and hospitality. Communities may experience demographic shifts as long-term residents are displaced and replaced by higher-income newcomers. Schools may face enrollment declines, altering funding structures and educational stability. Cities may face increased homelessness rates as cost-burdened households struggle to secure stable housing. Landlords may consolidate, with small owners selling and corporate entities purchasing properties, shifting the rental market toward large institutional ownership. And the divide between those who can afford to stay and those who cannot will widen deeper than at any time in California's history. California stands at a crossroads, not one defined by panic or fear, but by truth. A truth revealed slowly, calmly, clearly, as we follow the numbers, the policies, the insurance patterns, and the economic forces shaping the state's future. The rent shock of 2026 is not a sudden event. It is the culmination of years of pressure, policy, and circumstance, converging into a moment that will redefine housing across the state. And as these forces unfold, renters deserve clarity. Clarity without noise, without exaggeration, and without avoidance. That is what we will continue to provide. If this deep, honest examination helped you understand what is coming, and if you want to stay ahead of the changes reshaping California, subscribe to California Reality, where truth is told calmly, clearly, and without fear. More clarity, more truth, more California Reality.